Hello and welcome to the Deck Tech. I'm Ian Duke, and joining me is longtime pro player and Magic personality Paul Cheon, playing for Team Channel Fireball Fire. Thanks for joining us here.
It's good to be here.
Now, you are playing one of my favorite decks this weekend, a traditional-ish blue-red control deck. Tell us a little bit about it and why you chose it this weekend.
So this is a kind of a classic control deck that kind of existed prior to the new cards, but I think it got a lot of extra new tools, and really, again, the cards like Censor, Magma Spray, Pull from Tomorrow, all those cards kind of like added up perfectly so that I think this is actually like a tier 1 option. I'm really, and this is the type of deck that I've kind of had success with in the past. So I kind of wanted to like rekindle that. I've been having a tough time at the Pro Tour, so I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go back to my roots, try to play like a good old-fashioned control deck and see how I do.
Awesome, sounds great. Let's jump right into the cards and see what makes this deck tick. So these cards here, in my mind, are kind of like the reason to play a control deck. These are the cards that are gonna make sure that you win a long game if you can get there.
Right.
Tell us about, the numbers, the cards, how they all line up.
Okay, so kind of Glimmer of Genius is kind of the card that kind of allows you to kind of hit your land drops, hit your threats. The Scry 2, the Draw 2 is great. It also gives you energy, which allows you to use Harness Lightning to kill bigger creatures. Torrential Gearhulk is just the win condition for the deck, right? You're just trying to basically play a bunch of cheap interaction, draw your cards, then win the game with Torrential Gearhulk. Your deck is, primarily instants, so that's a great card. And then we have, of course, the newest addition, Pull from Tomorrow. When I kind of took my little brief hiatus, my brief little retirement, I was away from the game for 5 years. I came back. Blue-white control was a thing. Sphinx's Revelation was all over the place. I looked at this card, I'm like, all right, whatever, this is the closest thing. And kind of the problem with the blue decks in the past was it was all 2-for-1s. You had Glimmer of Genius, you had Torrential Gearhulk. I really wanted a card that lets you just really take over the game with cards. And in the late game, when you play against anything mid-range, casting a Pull from Tomorrow for 4 or 5 basically just seals the deal.
Awesome. Now, I will point out that Pull from Tomorrow, despite being very powerful, doesn't play that well with Torrential Gearhulk. So is that part of the reason why you're only playing 2 copies and you're shoring the rest up with Glimmer of Genius?
Yeah, definitely. So now the deck does not play Anticipate, so the Torrential Gearhulk does have less cards to like draw your cards, but I think that's okay because we have Pull from Tomorrow. It's one of those things where if you get to resolve a pull for 4 or 5, you don't really need to be Gearhulking for more card draw. At that point, you're looking to Gearhulk back counter spells or removal or whatever. Yeah.
Awesome. So that sounds like a really powerful endgame to get to. How do you get there? Let's take a look at the next set of cards here. This is a look into your removal suite here. 4 copies of Harness Lightning, a card we've seen a ton of in Standard, super powerful payoff for energy. 4 copies of Magma Spray, which I imagine is really well positioned this weekend. You'll tell us more about that. And then 2 copies of Sweltering Suns, a new sweeper from Amonkhet. So walk us through this red removal suite.
Okay, so Harness Lightning is basically just the best removal spell in the deck. You look at it and you're like, oh, it's 2 mana, deal 3 damage. But you have multiple ways to kind of produce energy. You have, of course, Ether Hub, you have Glimmer of Genius. So oftentimes Harness Lightning just acts as a 2 mana, just destroy anything. And the thing is, if you kill smaller creatures, you do have more energy, which kind of works off of the other Harness Lightnings, meaning your secondary or third Harness Lightnings get better. Magma Spray is really the card. I am so glad that you guys printed this card, because honestly, before, Scrap Heap Scrounger was a card we even talked that we were like, does this card need to be banned? Because it makes it so it's just such an oppressive card for control, because no matter what you do, it just keeps coming back, right? And now you guys kind of printed like the perfect, efficient way to kind of get rid of Scrap Heap Scrounger and kind of another new deck that's kind of rising in popularity, which is Zombies, Dread Wanderer. So having a 1 mana removal spell for like the creatures that continue to come back is huge. Then we have 2 copies of Sweltering Suns. Oftentimes you saw the blue control decks in the past splash a 3rd color because they wanted like a sweeper effect. So people would play Radiant Flames. You don't need to do that anymore. You get to just play Sweltering Suns, which is a fantastic sweeper. And on top of that, it's just never a dead card, right? That's why, a lot of people were kind of waffling between 1 and 2, but I opted to play 2 because, again, you play against a control that you can cycle it, but in the matchups where it's good, it's great. It's the best card. You absolutely want this against decks like Zombies. It's a decent card against, of course, Mardu Ballista, and then it's in case you play against Craig Wesco, this card's great.
Love it. Cool. Let's take a look at the next here. Of course, what what control deck would be complete without a nice suite of counter spells here? You've got some varied numbers here, some different effects, different selection. You can Gear Hulk them back. Yeah. Just give us a quick overview for each of these counter spells, like what its particular role is and why you're playing that many copies.
So I'm really glad that, again, you guys printed a card that isn't so embarrassing like Revolutionary Rebuff. You know, you actually have a playable 2-mana counter spell in Censor. You know, kind of looking at this, it doesn't seem insanely powerful, right? Using 2 mana to effectively force spike something is not all that great, but that's the thing. With this deck, you want to curve out. You want to make sure you have all the early interaction, and Censor's perfect at that. In the first few turns of the game, this is effectively a hard counter. It's really hard to play around, and when I talk to a lot of people, they're like, you just play like they don't have it. Because, again, you could just have a hard counter. You can have Essence Scatter. You can't have Negate. So you play around it, and then in the late game, you can just cycle it when it's a dead card. So really elegant card, I think. It just does exactly what the deck wants. Then we have, of course, our hard counters. We have 3 Disallows and 1 Void Shatter. That's kind of a mix, right? They basically do the same thing 95% of the time, but we were concerned about, you know, kind of the zombie deck, for example. We wanted a counterspell that exiles so that the Scrap Heap Scrounger, the Dread Wanderers don't come back. So I have a split because I think often I will value the Disallow, but I have 3 Disallows main, 1 Void Shatter main, and then 1 extra Void Shatter in the sideboard just to kind of hedge a little
And
bit.
of course, with Torrential Gear Hulk in the deck, you're kind of, by the time the game goes long, you're turning your graveyard into a toolbox.
Right.
So having a little bit of split and diversity in your spells really counts for a lot.
Yeah, like I said before, 95% of the time, these counters do exactly the same thing. But there are situations where Disallow is better, and there are situations where Void Shatter is better. And then, of course, the 2-mana counter spells. Honestly, I didn't really know what to expect, so I just kind of had a mix 2 and 2.
Yeah, they're both solid. You know, usually against most decks, both are valid cards.
Exactly.
Come up
That's the thing with Essence Scatter. Even in the mirror, it's just a hard counter for Torrential Gear Hulk. I found that Essence Scatter still pretty solid in the mirror.
Awesome stuff. Yeah. So rounding things out here with a couple extra cards here. Commit to Memory is one that's gotten a lot of buzz in the community. Tell us about this and its special interaction with Torrential Gear Hulk.
So I was definitely like, until the last minute, I was like, do I want 1 or 2 commits? And ultimately, I went with 1 because, again, I prefer all the cheap interaction because, you know, you have a lot of late game with the Gear Hulks and the pull from Tomorrows. So I ultimately went down to 1. But it's kind of like your catch-all because not every game plays out perfectly where you go censor your guy, spray your guy, censor your guy, disallow, etc. Sometimes they resolve a Gideon. Sometimes they resolve a Marvel and maybe they miss. And this is kind of your get out of jail card. It's like, okay, I had to tap out for Sweltering Suns, Gideon resolved, I need an out. And this is the out because it allows you to get those Planeswalkers that resolved, put it on top.
I've heard people call this the blue hero's downfall, which I think is a little bit of an exaggeration.
If you make it cost 3 mana, maybe we'll go there.
Yeah,
there's also really cool interaction that can happen sometimes where you have Memory, which is a sorcery, but when you cast Torrential Gear Hulk, you can actually cast the memory side of Commit to Memory, and I've actually found that to be quite useful because if you do it end of turn, oftentimes your opponent can't react, and you basically get to restart the game, but you have a 5/6 on the battlefield.
Sounds pretty good.
Oh, one last card. 1 additional card draw effect and Hieroglyphic Illumination. Basically, you know, for the most part it cycles, but we wanted 1 additional card to basically draw cards with the Torrential Gear Hulk. Again, like you said before, pull from Tomorrow plus Gear Hulk, Nambo.
Right.
So we wanted that 5th effect to kind of go with that.
That makes perfect sense. And then, of course, rounding things out, we have the mana base here. Nothing too fancy here. You've got your dual lands, your fast lands, your creature land. Ether Hub, of course, plays into the energy theme, and then a bunch of basics. Looks nice to me. I mean, you've got a lot of untapped lands. You've got a stable mana base. How's the mana been working for you?
It's been working fine. Kind of the last thing that we changed because like these are kind of the staples. You have your 8 dual lands. You have the hub, the 9 islands, 4 mountains. The last basic we added was the 5th mountain. We were kind of messing around with the cycle lands just because in case you get flooded, you can just cycle the lands away. Originally, it used to be a highland lake, but I didn't like the tap lands. So we ultimately opted to go for basic mountain because we're playing 2 copies of Sweltering Suns main deck. So we kind of just wanted to make sure we had that 17th red source in the main.
Love it. Well, the deck looks sweet. I would definitely take this for a spin at F&M or on Magic Online. Thanks so much for joining us, Paul. It's been a pleasure. And this is Ian Duke signing off from the Deck Tech.